Hospital slash morgue. What is the dumbest, yet most impressive cause of death you ever came across? My grandfather died when he decided to go and lie down because he wasn't feeling very well. My grandmother asked, "Should I come with you?" To which he responded, "Go back and eat your food." I'm not having a heart attack. Her was having a heart attack. I'm not having a heart attack. Man who died of heart attack. Not sure this quite fits with dumbest, but I guess impressive. I saw a guy come in for autopsy in multiple bags, drunk and hit by a train. The impressive part was that somehow they found his intact brain a significant distance away from his other body parts. His skull had come apart in such a way that his brain kept accelerating and flew out and landed on the ground. I worked in a funeral home for a while. It wasn't exactly an impressive death in the sense it would qualify for a Darwin Award or anything. But there was one guy who was pissed drunk after partying in the city. His friend stopped on the side of a major highway for him to puke, and he got hit by a taxi. We received his body, and he had a perfect impression of a Ford logo along with part of the grill from the taxi that hit him on his upper thigh. Never will forget that. Local naturopathic doctor took some Chinese herb to cleanse herself or some BS. Put herself in kidney failure. Husband finally calls 911 after she goes unconscious. At the hospital we are able to get her dialysis and bring her back around. Tell her with the right treatment we may be able to restore some kidney function. But if unable to, that she could continue on routine dialysis and hopefully get a kidney transplant. Her response is that she doesn't believe in modern medicine and that it's poison. She left the hospital to go home and treat herself with her own medicine. Her treatment didn't last long. The problem solved itself. Sometimes I see or hear stories of perfectly healthy people killing or injuring themselves in such stupid ways and think of all the kids with cancer or other diseases that will kill them / be incurable. Life is completely random, it seems. Not either of the opera quests, but I worked in news for 9 years and had some impressive ones. The most messed up was a man who threw himself into the tracks of a local train. The wheel of the train crushed the middle of his body and he was basically certain to die as soon as the train moved, and his injuries were going to pour out all his blood. The poor guy immediately regretted what he'd done, and he was still alive while the train was on him. It was the strangest thing seeing this guy talking to first responders. He must have been in shock, but was surprisingly coherent. He basically dictated a suicide note for his wife to police after the EMTs basically told him as soon as the train moved it was going to tear him apart fully and kill him. This man did it in the way an executive might dictate a memo. Very little emotion. To whom it may concern. Apostrophe. My dad used to be the guy who picked up the bodies and took them to the morgue / funeral home. His most impressive was this guy who got his steering wheel through his chest. Guy was actually still alive when my dad got to the scene. He was called by a doctor who happened to be stuck in the traffic caused by said wreck and came to render final aid. It was pure shock that was keeping the guy alive, and the fact that the steering column was holding everything in place. The doctor ended up pulling the guy off of the car, which killed him rather instantly. He hates talking about that story. That's rough right there. Knowing that the only way to save someone is to kill them, and having to be the one to do it. Not a hospital or morgue worker, but what about the guy who played Gaston at Disney, who died from lighting a firework on his head? Absolute tragedy. They said it was a mistake, but my boss was a former cop who responded to a stiff, dead body who sat on a plunger which impaled his intestines, and he bled to death. It caused a suction effect, and they had to break the toilet to remove him. Guy was in a very expensive suit too. I'll never understand why people are willing to shove random things into their orifices just to avoid a few minutes feeling embarrassed in a sex shop to find out what's safe to use. Unless you're a repeat customer, they are probably not going to remember you, and they are not going to shout your name in the grocery store and ask how you like the horse dildo you bought. 2 kids high on X went to the roof to recreate the Titanic scene where Leo is holding Kate. Both fell to their death. Stupid. Don't work in a hospital, but I'm a cop. So I have seen lots of deaths. Let me start by saying that I'm not telling this story to promote or endorse suicide. A few years ago we had a guy jump from one of our parking garages. That happens every now and then. What made it remarkable was how he did it. Witnesses say that he parked his car on the top level, got out and immediately sprinted toward the edge. When he got there, he dove over the wall without ever breaking stride. Most jumpers take a while to do it, but this guy was either dedicated or he knew that he wouldn't do it if he went too slow. Olympic level competitive suicide. About a dozen, give or take, people die each year in Yellowstone due to death by buffalo. When I was there in 2006 I had to stop Japanese tourists from taking a picture with a buffalo. The tourists in Yellowstone are something else. You've got people trying to pet bison, feel geyser water, and feed bears. Luckily, you can avoid most of them by hiking a moderately hard trail. I asked a park ranger there what the most ridiculous question a tourist has asked, and he said someone once asked him how the machine that powers the geyser works, thinking someone turns it on and off every X minutes. We live in a wild world, boys and girls. Due date of firework. Not a medical worker. In fact, infantryman for the US Army. While I was in Iraq we had been approached by a village leader telling us about a sicko that had been kidnapping their kids and lighting them on fire while he got his jollies. We were told not our AO and to let the police handle it. The police found him tied to a pole with his face burned off. Pretty sure he didn't live. In Iraq an ISIS guy was trying to escape the encirclement of Ramadi by the Iraqi army. We found him hung upside down from a power line with his head about 3 feet off the ground and arms tied behind his back. The locals told us they had beat him with a steel fence post then let their dogs have at his face. ISIS rule wasn't very popular. Shit like that happened to a lot of the fighters who tried to desert. On a bus, a young woman put her head by the windows despite being told repeatedly to not do so. She was hit by a sign and died. Don't work at hospital/morgue, but dealt with a lot of successions and reviewed death certificates. The ones that stick in my head are drowned in Hurricane Katrina, a ride attendant fell in front of a kid's roller coaster and was drugged to death, a guy who was pleasuring himself with a vase up his ass and caused a esophageal reaction and his heart stopped. He was like 25. 19 years old kid in the military was sucked out the back of a transport plane. Official cause of death was a 1,500-foot fall. A guy was assaulted and had major head injury. He survived but had to have a trach tube. He went home in a wheelchair and his family fed him fried chicken and he choked on a chicken bone and his brain was starved for oxygen. He was in a coma for a while and died a few months later. They then went back and charged the guy who assaulted him with murder. One of the most common causes of death at the Grand Canyon is the male instinct to urinate from high places. Men camping in the canyon go to pee off the edge of a ledge in the middle of the night, fall off, and die. A noble way to go, to be fair. German backpacker in Australia was doing some work on a farm to make some money. He accidentally stepped on a crop harvester blade and as he was reaching to free his foot, he cut up his hands. He left the wounds untreated, worked in muddy conditions, swamps, swam in livestock ponds, etc. He had both hands removed and his foot. The infection tracked to his lungs and he ultimately died. He had no mates in Australia. Not one person ever visited him. It would have been less stupid if he had been shredded up by the crop harvester, especially considering the farm he worked on had a medical and a veterinary clinic only a few minutes away. That's how my great-grandfather died. He cut his foot while working on the field one day in summer. He decided to just wash it on the little channels around the fields, just dipping his foot in and go on with the work. He got an infection and was dead in a week. Here is dumbest thing. Dying because you got in a wreck and decided you didn't want to wear a seatbelt. Dumb as shit. I have seen many of those. I read once a comment from a cop that said something like some people wearing a seatbelt still die, but he never had to scrape the pieces from the pavement with a shovel. Funeral director here. One of the deaths my boss had a few years back Not really dumb but certainly impressive. A guy who jumped off a building and landed straight on his feet, which caused his legs to literally be pushed through his skull. An in-law of mine used to be a medical examiner / pathologist for the city of Newark, NJ. While there was no shortage of violent death there, the most impressive was when motorcyclists would commit failure to fly off of the NJ Turnpike extension, an elevated roadway over Bayonne and Jersey City. They would take the roadway too fast, not be able to take a curve, strike the edge, and launch themselves into the air. Then splat. According to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the secret to flying is to throw yourself at the ground. But miss, I think these motorcyclists are missing that last part. So I'm very late, but me parents both work as doctors. My mum was working in R&D, accident and emergency, and basically what happened was that a guy on a motorbike was going too fast and at a stop couldn't stop. He crashed into the wing mirror of a bus and the mirror took off his head, helmet and all. The worst part of the story is that this flying head flew into a bus stop. The head hit a woman who was waiting there and killed her. Best one I've heard. Some guy got admitted to the ER for overdose. Was given Narcan. Woke up, acted like an asshole and left. 2 hours later he was admitted again, but in several pieces. He tried to jaywalk and got hit by 5 cars which literally beheaded him. Edit. Details may not be 100% accurate. Repeating from a story I heard 8 months ago from my GF's uncle, who is a doctor. The hospital when they hear that guy was being readmitted. Bruh, the hospital seeing him in several pieces. Bruh. Usually men don't go to the doctor when things are wrong. But this guy. He got an ear infection. Went to the doctor. Got a prescription for antibiotics. And then went hunting and decided not to take the antibiotics. Infection spread to his brain and he was in ICU for a while. He very nearly died several times during his lengthy stay as a result. So I hope it's okay to include this story. But I think he actually survived. Is this where I mention that guy who tried to do homemade liposuction with a vacuum cleaner? Pretty sure he just sucked his organs out. My uncle was an EMT for a period of time. He told me his least favorite story. They got a call about a motorcycle accident. When they got there, the driver of the motorcycle had been going so fast and wiped out so hard that he was nearly liquefied. He remembers having to wash human remains out of his boots. Moral of the story, it's dumb as fuck to drive that fast. Apparently the guy had been clocked at well over 100 miles per hour and was trying to outrun a cop.